Hi guys, my name is Usatima Ogajulu Samuel, and these are my colleagues. This is
Mary Jane Kiro Eze.
okay.
Ogechi Priscilla Obeke.
And I'm Aras Vintus.
I'm Roy Job.
Okay, we are the MONTFORT University students, and we have a very interesting presentation for you. We have taken a video from the World Economic Forum meeting held in 2018. We have a video here of a speech by the French president, Emmanuel Macron. In his speech, he said he wants to reform the French economy, and he has come up with 5 key pillars that he wants to use to restructure the economy. This is the link to the video, and that's the topic: reform agenda for France, 5 key pillars. Now, the purpose of this presentation is to critique these 5 key pillars that he's proposing. We want to see if these 5 key pillars, if they are realistic, if they're achievable, or if these are just ideologies and discourses that he's putting in place to the public to mislead them or to serve his personal interest. Now, moving into the presentation proper, the 5 key pillars. The very first one he talked about was research, human capital, and innovation. Here he said he wants to invest about 5% of the French GDP on education. And then also he did say that talk about what's the other part he talked about?
That's the research, human capital, and innovation. We talked about flexibility.
Yeah. Now he also talked about flexibility. And during the presentation proper, we're going to see what he proposed fully there and critique on that. The second part was on investment and capital. Here he is trying to encourage investors to forget about the idea of investing in loans, and he wants them to invest more in equity. Now we're going to look at that as well and see if that's achievable. Thirdly, he wants to increase acceleration and flexibility. Now he wants to bring up policies that will help corporate organizations to be flexible in their business dealings and also help them thrive in regards to in the economy, to help them thrive basically. So we'll look at that and see how that turns out, if that is also achievable as well. And then the 4th pillar he talked about was making France a model in the fight against global warming. Here he said by the year 2021 he wants to shut down all coal-fired stations in France. We will see if this is achievable or if it is an idea or a discourse to mislead the public. And then lastly, the 5th pillar is around cultural change. Now, in cultural change, he is trying to reduce bureaucracy, and he sees this as a means of improving, helping businesses thrive. We're going to see how this cultural change affects the general reform agenda. Let's see how this can, if this is going to have a positive outcome, or if this is just also a discourse that he's putting forward as well. Now, the structure of this presentation is this. We shall critique each of these points in subsequent slides. Now, each of my colleagues here would critique each of the points, and at the end of the presentation we would arrive at the conclusion, and we shall see if these 5 key pillars, if they are realistic. Now, talking about the first key pillar, I'll be inviting my colleague over here to critique on that.
The first key pillar made by Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, is that the research, human capital, and innovation. The French president wants 5% of the entire GDP invested in education. Following the World Atlas record of 2014, it is recorded that France that France's GDP contribution to education over the past 10 years has exceeded 5%. Now, if you take a thorough look at the graph, you understand that from 2009, 2010, to 11, 12, 13, 14, there's a high recorded rate in the GDP of education in France. So therefore, if the president wants an increase in educational sector of France, then there should be an increase in the rates of GDP in education in France, following France to be the world's 6th largest economy. The summary is that the GDP allocation for education, I think, should exceed 5%, and this is done for significant improvement in the educational sector of France. The second point being made by the presidency, Emmanuel Macron, is that making innovation the centerpiece of the economy and creating 10 billion euros to fund disruptive innovations. And then we can be talking about what are these disruptive innovations. It's simply trying to introduce, a foreign technology outside France into France. I mean, it could be from the neighboring countries of France, and then they could have like a bilateral economic relationship. But the point is that France has to understand the dynamics of innovation that underlines both disruptive and sustaining innovations. Now, before the presidency, Emmanuel Macron talks about this disruptive innovation. Obviously, he wants to introduce a new market into the France market, into the local economy. But another point to be noted is that this local economy, what are the levels, or what are the things that he has actually done to make sure that he fostered or improved the economy before introducing the disruptive economy? Because I think if these measures are not in place, trust me, the local economy of France are going to be totally wiped off. So that's what I think. And then thirdly, is it wise to spend over 10 billion euros on disruptive innovations and only 5% of the GDP in education? Of course, this can be a rhetoric question, but then you still have an answer, because if he's looking at trying to invest 5% on education, in France, and he's looking at, okay, he wants to educate more males and females. These are the future of the society. But then again, he wants to also use over 10 billion words of disruptive innovations, which can be twisted by leaders to serve their personal interests. Now, it is observed that most leaders of the world use disruptive innovations to salvage their own personal interests. If Emmanuel Macron is introducing this disruptive innovations
to serve his own personal interest,
he should be detailed and give clarity about what those disruptive innovations are. Because even when he spoke about the 5% education, 5% GDP to be spent in education, I think he was a bit detailed, and then he made the people to understand what this 5% education simply represents. What he even said about more women are to be educated than the male. So if the French president wants to introduce this innovation, I think that he should let the people understand what are the benefits of these innovations, and then how this is going to affect the French economy. As quoted by, you can see more from Clayton M. Christine, 1997, on his book published, The Innovative Dilemma. In conclusion, he should improve the current existing trends of business, because it's one thing to introduce a disruptive innovation, and it's another thing as well to work on the local economy. Then secondly, I think that he should provide more detailed information on this disruptive innovations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, MJ. Done justice to that. Okay, going to the next key pillar he talked about, investment and capital. Sorry. Now, President Emmanuel Macron said he wants more investment to be made on equity rather than loans. And also, he wants to mitigate the risk associated with big innovations by using equity investments or by financing equity investments. Now, it's a very brilliant idea, but the problem with that is this: there are lots of risks associated with equity investments. One of which is this: it's very demanding. Equity investment is very demanding. That's one. Two, it is very costly, and then it's time consuming. Now, has he thought about this plan very well? Does he have the time to implement all of this when he's considering his big innovations? When he's considering his equity investments. Now, secondly, when it comes to equity investments, there is a form of conflict of interest or power conflict, let me put it that way, because according to the loci of power, that's theory of power proposed by Gene Sharp, he did say that power is pluralistic and that it resides with a variety of group of people and also in a diversity of locations. What this means is that power is not monolithic. It doesn't belong to just one person, but it is pluralistic in nature. Now, if we relate that to this equity investment, it means that investors would, when they're investing their money, they would also want to have the power to make key decisions in these investments. So they wouldn't want to just invest their money and then sit back and watch what's happening. Now, what if the president, in his innovations that he's proposing, what if he has a different agenda and then the investors, they have a different agenda? Would have a power conflict, and this will impair the entire progress of the French economy. So in conclusion, I think the president should clearly state how he intends to tackle these challenges associated with equity financing. Now, moving over to the second point, he said that he wants to decrease corporate taxes from 33% to 25%. The reason is this: he wants to have an increase in capital gain. Now, also, I think it's a brilliant idea, but now, if you decrease tax, what you've done is that you've decreased obviously governments use tax to carry out infrastructures, provide basic amenities for the general public and all of that. So reduction in taxes is a direct representation of a reduction in the provision of infrastructures and basic amenities. And then also, Danny Yegan in 2015, he did a research on the US corporate tax returns from the years of 1996 to 2008. And from his findings, he said that there was no significant increase in the corporate investments, and there was no significant increase in employee compensation after tax was cut down. So again, if you relate this to Marxist theory, it's further tells Marxist theory tells us that there is no proven theory that suggests that decrease in tax would result in capital gain. So if you merge this together, you can arrive at the conclusion that decrease in tax is not the way forward. Decrease in tax does not increase capital gain. It does not increase investments, and it does not make the economy competitive. So to the third point.
Now, the third pillar that Emmanuel Macron pointed out was acceleration and flexibility, in which education is a key safety net to protect the people, but flexibility is necessary to able to be changed and adapt to the business environment. He wants flexible rules and structures to bring a change in the business model and to adapt into the global environment. The French president also suggested microeconomic reforms in energy, housing, transport to reduce the cost of the common people to make the economy more efficient and rapid. The French president wants to give more flexibility to companies to adapt to the marketplace. The flexibility will give organizations the power to hire and shed workers, which in turn causes an unemployment. The theory of unemployment is because job seekers don't have the right skills relative to the sort of jobs that employers hire for. The reform of the labor code will also accompany by reforms of unemployment insurance and job training systems. The unemployment insurance, however, is estimated at 3 to 5 billion, which may prove difficult to square with 2018 budget plans. According to Marxist theory, the simple idea is that the policy process, far being a rational weighing up of alternatives, is driven by powerful socio-economic force that set the agenda, structure decision makers' choices, constrain implementation, and ensure that the interest of the most powerful determines the output and outcome of the political system, which basically means that always the structure of the decision making serves the interest of the powerful. To summarize, as a result of these flexibilities given to these organizations, there is an unemployment crisis throughout the country, which is at a rate of 8.9% for the past. It is like for 9% for the past 10 years. It doesn't have a change at all. So, policy measures should be implemented to bring down this unemployment crisis in the country.
Okay.
Thank you, Ron. Talking about making France a model in the fight against global warming, the French president wants to reduce the rate of CO2 emission and the negative impact on global warming by shutting down all coal-fired stations in France by 2021. However, this can be said about other countries such as Poland that heavily depend on coal-powered plant stations in the country. Other countries such as Syria and the United States of America outrightly rejected the idea of shutting down coal-powered plants. Well, this can be said to boil down to the ideology of the President of the United States of America, who expressly said that he doesn't believe in the climate change issues. He actually said that most of the climate change issues are false. Well, this can be seen to boil down to the ideology of the President, which, according to Marxist conception of ideology, refers to as false consciousness. Well, we can see that such ideology by the President of the United States of America, Mr. Donald Trump, have far-reaching consequences on the issues of climate change. Now, in conclusion to that point, we can say that the fight against global warming requires a collective effort from other countries, not just France alone, because the issue of climate change is bigger than just one country alone. We need the collective efforts of other countries, the genuine efforts to show that yes, we are making a change and an impact in the fight against climate change. Moving on to the second point, which the French president claims that France has become the first country in the world to prohibit exploration and exploitation of hydrocarbons on French territory. However, major exploration and exploitation concessions continues by major market players in France. Well, this may or may not be renewed beyond 2040. Well, what is happening here can actually be linked to cultural hegemony, in which elites use their powers to manipulate the beliefs, perceptions, and values of the majority. Well, to conclude that point, we can say that if the French president claims he wants to make France a model in the fight against climate change, he should be transparent enough with his words and come out clean. If he says that there is no exploitation and exploration of hydrocarbons on French territory, then he should prohibit or totally ban such exploration and exploitations by major marketers in France to show that yes, he's genuine in the fight against climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, the fifth key pillar of the president's agenda is on cultural change, where he spoke about unpredictability is counterproductive. Hence, visibility into the next 5 years of his plan is a key success to his reform agenda. As regards to cultural change, seeing into the next 5 years of the president's plan is critical to his success of the reform agenda. As part of this, he plans to achieve this by reducing taxes and introducing new regulations to bring about business stability to the citizens, to investors and enterprises in France. This relates to the management ideology in dealing with public issues. But according to Marxist theory of society, there is no proven theory that suggests that reducing taxes and regulations can help the president to predict the future of France. This shows that the visibility of France's economy is not possible. In conclusion, Marxist theory contradicts the president's idea of predicting the future of the economy, and reducing taxes means less income to the economy, which affects the quality of life of the citizens. Moving on, the second point still on cultural change, the president talks about bureaucracy in France. As part of his cultural change reform agenda, he believes that this will attract more investors in France and make France more competitive with other European countries. But according to Max Weber, there is a conflict between bureaucracy and charisma. This implies that some private organizations that benefit from multiplicity of administrative layers would object to the idea of the bureaucracy. And in conclusion, bureaucracy cannot be reduced as suggested by the French president.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. You guys have done well.
Thank you.
Okay, so in conclusion,
3 minutes.
having looked at these five key pillars, we can tell that if President Emmanuel Macron really wants to effect a change in the French economy, bringing up his 5 key pillars reform agenda is a good one, but he really needs to think and look at it critically, examine the pitfalls, and then he should also know that in the fight against global warming, that it's not a fight for France alone. It has to unite other countries like Poland, Syria, and USA for a better fight against global warming. Yeah, it shouldn't be just France alone. Now, also, when he was talking about investment in education, over the past, between the years of 2008 and 2014, France recorded a GDP investment in education of 5% and above. Yeah, to be clear, I think from 5.4% to 5.7%. So how can you now be proposing 5% in 2018? It's quite small. So I think he should propose maybe a GDP allocation to education of about 10% or more.
10%.
Yeah, I think that would have a positive effect on the educational sector. And then thirdly, when it comes to innovative, big innovations, yes, disruptive innovations, he said he wants to mitigate the risk associated with that using equity investment. Now, he hasn't told us how he intends to tackle the challenges that would come with these equity investments. So he should have a laid down plan, and he should complain. He should tell everyone the steps that are involved in this equity financing. So this is the end of our critique on the video, and I hope you enjoyed yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.